and welcome back to the Nasty Metal Production channel here at YouTube, and welcome to another Wednesday review. So, today I am reviewing the third full-length album from the Chilean heavy metal band Bolido, which is titled Against the World, which was released through Fighter Records on June 15th. So, Bolido, I've actually have reviewed their second full-length album, Heavy Bombers, back in 2017, which was around, I believe, November or December time, was I believe when I reviewed this album, Heavy Bombers. And I loved it. I loved the album a lot. I thought it was a great album since I was not really familiar with the band. Their first album did get reissued on Stormspell back, I believe, on the year that when it was released. Maybe 2015, maybe. But they had repressed it, and I thought that was a good album, but Heavy Bombers just really showed the maturity. And so, with this band, with this album here, their third full-length album, Against the World, well, let me just see. And really to just give you my honest thoughts on whether or not I really think that this album, if it really is very good, and if it's actually a good follow-up to Heavy Bombers. So without further ado, let me get into my thoughts on Against the World from Bolido. Alright, so, before I really get into any of my thoughts on this album, you know what I have to do? I have to do a track listing rundown so I can tell you folks what are the songs on this album and how many songs this album has, and also what is its time length. And since we have at least about 9 songs here, and it all clocks in at 56 minutes and 12 seconds. So these 9 songs are, of course, opening up with the title track, then follows with, I believe, Mig Alley or MIG Alley. Depends, because of the word Mig is obviously in all upper cases, so, well, I think it means MIG Alley, so that's what I'm going with, but I could be wrong. Either way, what follows next is Time to Be Yourself, Angel in Black and White, BHWF, right? Yeah, BHWF. In Dreams, Turbo, Heartbreaker, which is not a cover of the Led Zeppelin song of the same name. Good. Even though I actually kind of like that song, but so at least it's not a cover of a, just, you know, a typical band, I guess you can say. And of course, ending with the very epic long White Hell. So there's your 9 songs. So, Against the World. Alright, I'm going to be very honest with you. This is a pretty good album. It does kind of follow in the sort of same footsteps as Heavy Bombers. But this album, I think, just like with Heavy Bombers, if I remember, did kind of play around with some very interesting and very, I wouldn't say experimental, but it did kind of play with some different tempo stuff, and just very different pace sort of tracks, and very different, just overall very interesting tempos. This album goes even further with really playing around with some really odd and very different tempos for some of these songs. But you definitely do get a lot of typical sort of tracks. I can definitely run through those. The title track, MIG Alley, BHWF kind of plays around with some of that same sort of has a very traditional sort of metal tempo, but it is very different. And I'll definitely lump that in with some of the more really interesting, very different, and sort of just very odd, almost tempo songs. But Turbo, Heartbreaker, and even for the most part, White Hell, are very much, you're very typical, very traditional metal tracks, and with their with traditional tempos that you expect from a lot of the metal songs. Again, both MIG Alley and Turbo are obviously just straight up fret burners. They're definitely at least it's very close to some of the stuff off of Heavy Bombers. Again, and of course with we kind of mentioned the singer's name, Johnny Trevio, who obviously very much reminds me of James Neal from Malice. He's got that very I wouldn't say nasally, but very good sort of just great range to him. And again, that's the best vocalist I always will compare him to is James Neal of Malice. Just has that voice to it, and it works to a lot of these songs. So they're all just straight up fret burners. Again, just great mid-paced stuff too, like with Against the World. But Heartbreaker, of course, has a very almost bluesy, very typical, like for example, I believe, I can't remember already for some fucking reason now. Starstruck from Rainbow. It's got that sort of same pacing going on. It's in that sort of same vein. I know I kind of paused there for a bit. Apologize. Either way, it's staying in. All right. So I got at least a lot of the more traditional tempo songs out of the way, because again, they're all good songs. But what really kind of is what is different to me on this album compared to Heavy Bombers, that the one that really just kind of made it it was a little different for me, and it really took some time for me to really get used to. But there's some really almost very differently tempoed songs that a lot of stuff that you don't hear a lot on a metal album. They're so differently tempoed, and that's with songs like Time to Be Yourself, Angel in Black and White, even for the most part BHWF, and In Dreams. Both these songs are just so different in tempo, but especially again with Time to Be Yourself, which has kind of a very funky kind of tempo going on, especially with some of the guitar riffs. It kind of has, especially the bass, it's playing a little bit of a very funky sort of bass, but it's more so in the style of funk that I think guys like Joe Satriani will kind of play around on some of his stuff. For example, anything off of Surfing with the Alien. That kind of sort of tempo-y, kind of shreddy, funky, kind of just very hard rock kind of very pacing and riffs. So it's very much reminds me of that. But again, it's so differently tempoed also, and it just kind of makes it different. Same thing with Angel in Black and White. BHWF kind of has this sort of almost I wouldn't say jerky, but it definitely plays around with a very just odd, very tempo, and it's different for the most part. In Dreams is actually a very sort of odd number 2. This one just starts off very, very dark and very just sort of brooding and almost just, what's the best? I guess very dark and brooding in its acoustic guitars, and of course with Johnny Trevio's vocals are very really just fit this mood for the beginning of here. But as the finally which only lasts for at least a minute or so, we then get into the actual track, and for some reason, I hope I don't turn off a lot of people, but this is just obviously when me being familiar with bands like, for example, like Alice in Chains or Soundgarden, the riffing on for In Dreams for the first half of this song with this sort of almost slow bluesy tempo, which is more different from like Heartbreaker. Heartbreaker is like your traditional bluesy heavy rock track, whereas In Dreams has this sort of very slow, almost very doomy bluesy riff that obviously was playing off the sort of stuff like either Black Sabbath, but bands like Alice in Chains and Soundgarden really did were bands that really kind of darkened more of that they really made it more plodding, almost very, very methodical and slow, and that's kind of the sort of pacing that I get from at least the beginning riffs for In Dreams. It just has a very grungy feel for some reason here, and that's what I'm getting from it. So it's very dark and heavy and slow, but as the song progresses, there's a part towards at least the later half of this track where it does speed up and get very thrashy a bit. So it really does kind of play around with the pacing. It's very, I guess, progressive almost, but it's just so different. And of course, it ends up with the same riff that obviously begins with the sort of very slow, almost dirgy, bluesy, grungy kind of riffing. And it is very interesting, and it's not something I hear a lot from a lot of metal bands. So it's kind of just very interesting that a band like Bolido is able to kind of really take chances in this and really kind of push a little bit of their musical chops a bit, and really kind of pushes it in that needle in that sort of in that direction a little bit differently. I think it's very interesting. But speaking of very ambitious ones, let's definitely talk about White Hell, which is the very epic 21 minute and 12-second track which ends the album. This has a story. It's actually based around the Battle of Kursk, which obviously was the battle between the Nazis and the Soviet Union back in 1943. And they do a great way of capturing the sort of dark and harshness and the overall just the level of just the overall feel of what you expect for a track. I think they do a great way on really capturing the atmosphere of that battle in this one song. Of course, it's got some storytelling. It's very progressive, very fast in a lot of places, but it's so interesting and it's different. And I think that they do a fine job on capturing the atmosphere and just obviously the cold, dark, and just hellish nightmare that I obviously could imagine the Battle of Kursk to be. Bolido really captures all of that in this one song. And again, 21 minutes and 12 seconds. Obviously the war probably felt like an eternity. They tried to capture a little bit in that. I'm not saying that in a bad way. I'm saying that in probably in the most respectful way that I can, because it is a very good track, though in its own right. I was very skeptical about how what they were going to do with the 21 minute and 12 second time length. Because you know how I probably feel about a track like Empire of the Clouds from Iron Maiden. But it doesn't make me feel like that I'm there for almost 5 hours. Instead, the song really does feel like more like a 5-minute track. So I really think it's ambitious. I think that they took a chance with doing something interesting like this. And so kudos to Bolido for actually coming up with a track like this. So it's a very good song and it ends well. But again, the story, it's all there. So they did fine. So there we go. That ends out my thoughts on Against the World, the third album from Bolido, and my rating, I'm giving it a 9.007 out of 10. I think it's a very solid album. I don't know if, right, yeah, 07. Of course, you probably see the obviously depending on which screen, either your left or your right, you probably at least see the score number there. Still, it's just, I would not say that this is as good as Heavy Bombers, but it still is very close enough to being a very good, solid effort from them. So they did find, of course, the recording is very raw in places, which probably adds to the overall atmosphere of the album. So it's a very good album nonetheless, and I think it's definitely, worthy of recommending to you. So if you really want to check out this album, I'm going to leave you a link to, of course, Fighter Records Bandcamp page, which they also do leave a link to their site where you can purchase this physically on CD. So you can listen to it on Bandcamp, and if you like it, you can where you can find the link to their site, to their store, where you can purchase this, since they leave it in their Bandcamp page on that page for the album. So with that, there we go. I hope all of you enjoyed. This is Heavy Thrasher saying I'm out, and I'll see you all later. Take care, everyone.